things are going to get slightly more complex. So when things start getting more complex than this, we're gonna put it into a function because we might want to call it later. So to do that, just click your plus button right here, and we're gonna call this handle actor detected in. We can say capture volume. We'll say collision sphere. Collision. Handle actor detected in collision sphere. I like it. Okay. Now, because we're going to use this for multiple things, let's just add a parameter in here. So if you go into your inputs, press the plus button. And we're going to say B, which is the prefix for any bool, which is a yes, no, was added. Because we might want to use this, let's say we're adding something or we're removing it. We can use the same function, so we can reuse some functionality. Okay, cool. So we have that there. Oh, and I don't know how many times I've done this, but we'll create all this logic, but then I'll forget to call the thing. So let's go back before we made this function and just call it right here. So handle actor detected in collision sphere. And you know how I said that we might want to add or we might want to take away. Well, we're trying to simulate something was there, since these things are technically overlapping. So go ahead and check that to say, hey, this thing. And I forgot to add the thing that we're trying to detect. So let's go back in here real quick. Click on it, and let's add the actor. Just type in actor, and then that's your object reference in actor. Reason I chose actor is because that's what's going to spit out of that for each loop. Okay, and so our array element, see that actor object reference? So even though you said, hey, filter for characters, even though you filtered for that, it doesn't spit out as a character, it spits out as an actor, which I said earlier on, character inherits from actor, so that's how that whole relationship works. So it comes out of here as an actor, even though it's a character, so we're later going to have to cast to it, which we're going to go ahead and do right away. Okay, so we handle actor detecting collision sphere, double click on it, go into here, and let's start doing our work. So even though we've already checked in the previous class that we were on the server, you need to get in the habit of always. Let's not use that one. Let's use the macro version. Okay. You get into the habit of always checking that you're on the server. It's not necessarily because you're accidentally going to get onto the client. It's so that anybody looking at your code goes, oh, okay, this only happens on the server. Got it. It's a readability thing, and that's the most important thing about what you're doing. They assume if you go into the workforce that you know how to code, right? Yeah, you're going to make mistakes. Everybody does, but your logic's going to work, but they need to be able to read your logic is what I'm trying to get at. So anyway, since I said this is an actor, we need to get to our third-person character, so BP, third-person character. Okay. And you can double click on there to add a nice little reroute node. Keep that nice and pretty looking. We're gonna use our sequence again. Okay, and then the first thing we need to do is press B-boy and then left click. And then that's going to give us what's called a branch node, which is it's going to take that was added that we added in here, and it's going to let us do some logic with it. So we said, hey, was it added? And so basically it's going to say, hey, was it added? Do this. Was it not added? Do that. And once again, let's add some reroute nodes to clear this up a little bit. You queen. Cool. Okay, so what we need to do is if we're adding, we need to add them we need to store them. If it's taking them away, we need to unstore them, right? So we need something to store them in. So we're going to make an array, which is we had in the for loop, only it's going to be a for loop of characters. So we're going to right click on the third person character, remote to a variable, and we're going to call it characters in collision sphere. Okay, so these are going to be used to store the characters that are currently in the collision sphere. Now, delete this, compile. All right, I'm going to click on characters in the collision sphere. That variable right there. I'm going to come over here into the details. If you don't see your details, I believe you can pop in one of these windows here and click on details. That will pop it back up. Sometimes this details panel, they get hidden, they get moved around. Lots of weird stuff happens. Always, if you can't find a screen I'm talking about, just Google it. You'll find it. You'll find a shortcut or something somewhere. They'll say, "Oh, there's the screen." Anyway, back to what I'm saying. So we have our third-person character, but it's a singleton. It's a one thing. We want to make it an array, and as you can tell you there, it's like, hey, how do I make this an array? You just do the drop down, click array, and now it can hold multiple things instead of just one thing. And so characters is plural. We need more thing, right? Naming honestly doesn't matter, but other than readability, but that's besides the point. So characters are collision sphere. How we add things to this array is we just simply say add. Now we could do add or add unique. Add unique has an extra check to make sure we haven't added that character before. Is to reduce having duplicates. So we don't have duplicate entries in here. And not having duplicates is important because we're going to score the capture point differently depending on how many characters are in the volume. And if you're showing up twice, you get double the score, and that breaks the game, right? Okay, so if the cast succeeds, we know it's valid, so we can go ahead and add it in there. So let's take the character and just plop it right in there. Add some reroute nodes to clear yourself up. Okay, so let's say we weren't adding, so we need to remove. Let's do remove item. Since we know that's that character that we just pulled off from, wham. Okay, cool. So it's okay to overlap. I'm using the arrow keys, by the way, to move that like that after I highlight it. It's okay to have executables and these lines overlap, but try not to overlap. Executables won't break your code, but it will make whoever's reviewing your code really angry because it's hard to read. So after we add something, if anything comes into the sphere, if anything goes out of the sphere, we want to manage some performance here. And so basically we want to turn on and off the ticking timer that's keeping track of who's in there and how many are in there. So we basically need to manage our timer. So to do that, let's make its own function called manage progress timer, and that's the progress of capture. Okay, I'm going to back out of here. Okay, I'm back on my capture point outside of that function. And I'm just hitting the back key on my mouse to go back and forth. You could just go to you could double click. Oops, I just totally messed that up. Okay, go back into our function. So you can get in and out of functions. Clicking our functions, you can click them over here. I use the back key to get in and out of stuff as quick as possible. So after we've added or removed, we're going to call that function that we just made, manage progress timer. Going to be off the sequence right there. Okay, and now if you were submitting this in for a review, you would add a comment on here. And you would do something like I already had a comment because I've already proofed all this stuff. Up characters and capture volume. We called it collision sphere. Update characters and collision sphere array, depending on if they are added or removed from the volume, and make the progress timer manage itself. And you would do something like that. I would change it to a different color that's a little more readable. So anytime you make a function, we're not going to do this every time, just for time reasons, but this is what you should do. You could also put that data right here in the description, which is nice because it will be there when you highlight over it. So description here. Okay, and now you can see that little tooltip pops up. Pretty nice. And you can categorize it. You can do all sorts of organizational stuff. And if you were submitting this for work, you would definitely want to do that. But we're not doing that right now. So let's look what happens in our managed progress timer. Okay, I have this broken down into several functions. You might be able to combine this into one, but I was trying to think future-proofing some of this stuff. Sometimes that's good, sometimes that's bad, but it's not gonna break anything to have several embedded functions here. So we're just gonna go with what I originally had. So we're gonna grab the characters in collision sphere that we just made, and we're gonna get its length here, and that's just saying, okay, how many things are entered in here? How many entries are there? And we're going to ask the question, is it greater than 0? Okay, and if it is, we're going to call another function to activate it. And what I mean by activate what? Activate the timer that ticks progress. And instead of using a branch, it makes more sense to have that as the input for our manage function. So let me get rid of that real quick. So activate. Okay, let's put an input in here. Boolean. Haha, not actor. Wow. Okay, once again, you could probably click this. Yeah. I use the back key. You can click that little arrow to get yourself back to where you were over here. Run off here. And let's do that. There you go. So that makes more sense. I was rambling a little bit. Okay, now Q Queen. Okay, manage progress timer basically says, hey, do we have any characters in the volume? If they're greater than 0, it should be active. If not, it's going to do the opposite. You see how I didn't handle the B here? That's because S wasn't capitalized. There it goes. Okay, once again, another authority check. I keep doing that one. Take it off of here. And if we were using these all in the same spot, I wouldn't be as picky about having these checks here, but we are going to use this progress timer in more than one spot. So let's press B boy, hold it, left click. We got our branch. You could also just type in branch. Should be active, and we're going to do something. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to set a timer. This is going to be our main progress timer. So we have it here. We're going to run some logic before it, so let's not click anything yet. Right click over here, except for, of course, right click. Promote to a variable. We're going to call this progress timer. Basically, this holds a reference to the timer after we've called it so that we can reference it. A couple things we want to do here. We want to promote this to a variable. Call that our progress tick rate. That's how often this thing is going to tick. And this is why you wouldn't want to run this off the tick, because like if you don't want it 30 times a second, we just want to run it 1 time a second. It's not really critical to have it run more times than that, unless you're doing a very competitive game and you could run it several more times, maybe 0.1, maybe 0.01. Well, that might be, at that point, you might as well run on the tick. In some games, that makes sense, but for what we're doing, it's not. Doesn't. Okay, we want this to be looping. Okay, and now let's actually create our event. Drag off of here, create event. Okay, and what we'll do is we'll just do the drop down, create matching event. Okay, we'll call this progress timer tick. Okay, now this will cause problems. You can't have events inside functions. So what we're going to do is we're going to control X to cut that, and we're going to go back into our main event graph, and we're just going to paste it down here. Progress timer tick. Try to compile, make sure the errors pop up. Okay, it did. Okay, we're going to go find out what's wrong. This is back in our function right here. It's like, what? That thing doesn't exist. You removed it. Okay, fine. Drop down, select it here. And that's just because we moved it. It didn't like it. Okay. So before we actually call this, though, we want to add a check. So let's get the progress timer that we just made. We're going to get it. And then we're going to just type in is timer active. Okay. And then if it's not, we're going to run that logic because we don't want to start the timer if it's already going. I just type in not, that comes up. So it's, is it active? Yes. But if it's not, then we want to run off our true logic. So you're probably asking me, well, why didn't you just put the bool there? Wouldn't it be more performant to just run off of here and come out the false? That's because there's two reasons. So first off, your brain likes to hear truths. It understands true conditions way easier than it can understand false conditions. That's why reading the top is easier than reading the bottom here. So you always want to try to execute true conditions whenever you can. Additionally, in native code, which is going to be an engineer or even you eventually looking at this stuff, if he were to write this in C++, he wouldn't say if else and then fill in the else statement. He would do the if statement, put a not condition just like this, and then do his logic. This just keeps things more consistent, and it allows people from various backgrounds, whether they're an engineer or whoever, to look at your stuff and to clearly know what's going on. So that's why we do it like that. A method to the madness here. Okay, so if our timer should be, did I misspell that? I didn't capitalize that, did I? Okay, and you can see it handles spacing nice for you. Sometimes I like that, sometimes I don't. So if it's not supposed to be active, we're going to clear the timer so we can pull off the same thing. Clear and invalidate timer. And then run it off of here. And then just clean up your nodes. Of this. Okay, so it basically just starts or stops the timer based off the input bool, and then it does a progress timer tick. Let's save. All right, let's back out of here. Okay, it's always a good idea to run back through your code, make sure everything occurred or is set up the way you expected it. Okay, so now that we have this event here, let's go ahead and add a comment around it. So let's just F2 this so we can steal this text, copy it, put it over here. D for comment, Victor that, space that, over here, drag out, color it up a little bit. Okay, so let's drag off of here, comment this up even more. This is the server stuff. Let's just say server only. I know this seems like really redundant, but you really need to make sure that people know what your stuff is doing and the way it's doing, especially when you're talking server client logic. Okay, so the other thing that this thing is going to have, it's going to have an in-world widget. So let's add a widget component. Widget. Okay, and so we have our widget selected here. With it selected, let's select screen space. So this is going to be the thing that's in the world that as the capture point's being captured, you can actually see it. We'll have one on our HUD, right? And there'll be like an alphabetical order for each capture point, and then there'll be one on the world. I think Battlefield does that. I think Battlefront does that. I think it's just a common thing that you're going to see in almost all capture flag type games. We don't have the widget itself. Okay, so we don't forget that. Let's go ahead and just create the class right now so we can populate it in here real quick. Okay, so let's just right click over here, go down to user interface, and click widget blueprint. Okay, we want the user widget class. And we might make a parent class so we can do some things, but let's just call this, let's see, capture point world widget. All right. Okay, so we got our capture point world widget. Let's go, and it's easy to forget a lot of these things. So let's go back to our capture point, type or go into here, go capture point world widget. So that way it actually puts that widget in there, even though it's an empty widget right now. And let's go to that capture point world widget, because the very first thing we're going to give it is a reference to ourselves. So, okay. Okay, cool. Get out of the designer, which is, we're going to make it look all pretty, and go over to our graph. And let's add a variable called capture point. Oh, I've done that twice now. Okay, we'll add the object reference. And let's, so it's, let's see if we can do an expose on spawn, which means when we create the widget, we'll be able to see it. We'll make it editable, but we're going to make a setter for it. I want to avoid setting things outside of the class so that way you know what's setting it. So let's make a setter for it. This is a little redundant, but it keeps our stuff clean. There'd be nothing wrong if you didn't do this, but I'm going to do it anyway. So let's say set capture point. And then all this is going to do, it's like a setter for a setter. I know it seems silly, but this really does help keep organized if you don't, especially when it comes to widgets. Sometimes it's hard to tell what's setting what when it's doing it from outside the class. You would definitely do this on non-widgets. You would always have a setter. And in code, you would absolutely you try to keep almost nothing public, always having a setter. Okay, so set capture point. So why am I doing that? All right, let me get back to what I was originally doing.